Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into polished shoes you never picked out, fastening a stiff wool dress that hangs all wrong, and stepping through those grand front doors of a house that'll never feel like yours. You're not a servant, you're not a visitor. You're something caught in the middle, something nobody quite knows what to do with. A governess. You won't believe this, but even though you earn less than most cooks, you're supposed to speak French, play piano, quote Latin, and teach history without messing up your sleeves or your dignity. Welcome to your first position. Welcome to being nobody. Alright, before we get too comfortable, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, but only if it feels right. And if you're listening from somewhere out there, drop your location and what time it is in the comments. Turn down those lights. Get that fan running for some ambient sound. And let's ease into tonight's little story. You're standing at the edge of the gravel driveway, your bag in one hand, your reference letters signed in smudged ink by the headmistress of Mrs. Parsons' seminary in the other. In front of you sits Windmere House, all grey stone and quiet, with towers pointing up at the grim English sky. The butler doesn't smile. Of course he doesn't. His eyebrows move when you say your name. Then he disappears inside without a word. You wait like cold tea on the front step, not sure if you should follow. You're not important enough for a real welcome, but too refined to just walk in. When the door finally opens again, it's a kitchen maid who brings you inside. Her apron stained with beet juice. She mumbles your name wrong, then vanishes down the servants' hallway. Your arrival, not worth noting, not even worth talking about. In the sitting room, the mistress looks you up and down like a cut of meat, but less interesting. Her own daughter sulks next to her, poking the edge of your travelling dress with a stockinged foot. You'll be teaching arithmetic, French, geography, and scripture, the mistress says, like she's listing rodents in the attic. No dinner in the dining room will have a tray brought up. The governess before you, Mrs. Crowthorne, left suddenly. They don't say why. You'll figure it out soon enough. Upstairs, your room's waiting. If you thought you'd be anywhere near the children's rooms, think again. You're led to a narrow staircase behind a linen closet and told to keep your boots off the rugs. It smells like boiled cabbage and old socks. Your bedroom is under the eaves. The ceiling tilts like it's embarrassed. One iron bed, one washstand with a crack in the bowl, one chair with a splintering seat. The wallpaper peels in strips behind the dresser and the fireplace. Cold. The housemaid says they don't light fires in governess rooms until November. It's October and raining. You unpack with careful attention. You hang your one nice dress on the back of the door, not too close to the wall, in case the dampness ruins it. Your books go on the windowsill. Mrs. Parsons' Dictionary of Moral Instruction, your worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress, and a pressed flower Bible from a school friend you'll probably never see again. The house bell in the hallway rings. Suddenly, it isn't for you, it's for the footman. But still, you jump. Already, the house is changing you, smoothing your edges. You look at the only mirror in the room. A spot of rust has eaten through its middle, leaving your reflection like a spirit's. You barely recognise the eyes looking back. A knock, a tray. Dinner's arrived. Grey mutton, a chunk of bread, and tea that smells faintly of iron. No dessert, of course. The dessert is for the dining room. You eat in silence, careful not to drip anything on the bedspread. You're not sure if anyone ever cleans it. Later, you sit by the window, watching smoke rise from chimneys that don't heat your room. Somewhere below, music plays softly, a piano waltz. Maybe the lady of the house is having guests over. Maybe the children are dancing. You aren't invited. You drink the last of the metallic tea. The wind shakes the window. You're here now. The children are sleeping, and so are your chances of ever being anything different. The next morning starts before the sun bothers to show up. There's no bell for you, no polite knock, just the faint moan of pipes in the walls and the creak of footsteps above. You wake under a blanket that never quite gets warm and dress by candlelight, trying not to shake. Downstairs, the kitchen's busy with noise and clanging, but you're not welcome there. The cook doesn't look up when you walk by. The kitchen maid stares like you've stolen her toast. You take your lukewarm tea and half slice of oatcake back upstairs to prepare your lessons. Your students, Clara, age 9, and Felix, age 7. Clara corrects your Latin. She's wrong, but she does it with such icy confidence that for a second you question yourself. Felix asks why your dress is so ugly. Then he tells you Mrs. Crowthorne used to cry. You smile thinly and start reciting the names of English counties. The children yawn at 10:30. You're called to the schoolroom pantry for a glass of milk and a dry biscuit. Not a minute more, not a bite less. You're supposed to stay separate, a presence, not a person. A walking lesson plan with a hemline. Midday brings handwriting practice. Felix breaks a pen and blames you. Clara tilts her lines with purposeful defiance. You correct her. She cries. The lady of the house storms in, shocked that you've upset the child. You apologise, even though you haven't raised your voice above a whisper all day. You won't believe this, but even whispering can be seen as crossing a line. After lunch, you take them to the garden for fresh air. You sit on the bench under the yew hedge while they scream and fight over a jump rope. One of the gardeners looks at you carefully like he's not sure whether to tip his hat or pretend you don't exist. He settles for neither. You look away. By 4 o'clock your legs hurt, your head throbs, and you've said the phrase, "Watch your tone," at least 15 times. You retreat to your attic room and collapse into the shaky chair. You scribble notes for tomorrow's history lesson. The Plantagenets again. Maybe they'll remember this time, or maybe not. You start planning a quiz, then stop halfway through. What's the point? You reach for a letter, one you've written in pieces, never sent to your friend Amelia from seminary. You imagine telling her about the cold sheets, the children's cruel games, the way Clara copies her mother's contempt already, but the words die in your lap. What could you say that wouldn't sound like complaining? You tuck the letter into your Bible and light your single candle. Outside, the rain comes back. You hear laughter below, boots clattering on marble, the muffled pop of champagne. A party in the sitting room, the same room you dusted earlier while the children took their piano lessons. Your hands still smell faintly of lemon polish. No one invited you, of course. A governess at a party, that would be social suicide for them. But you hear a piece of conversation as someone opens a window, a gentleman's voice, low and amused. She looks like a crow, that one, always watching, never speaking. They laugh. You don't cry. You just blow out the candle. You lie in the dark and stare at the beams overhead, each knot in the wood, a silent witness. One creaks now and then, like it might collapse. And you start to disappear, just a little, an inch at a time. You were so proud to get this position, so proud of your posture, your vocabulary, your perfect penmanship. But none of those things matter here. Here you're tolerated until you aren't. Here you're the most educated person in the room and the least respected. Here you're the ghost in the house. You wake again to the ceiling beam, this time with a kink in your neck and a chill behind your knees. The blanket has fallen to the floor. Sometime in the night you fumble for it, pull it up and breathe into your hands before sitting upright. Another day. The morning light seeps in grey through the small window. You walk to it, rubbing at the frost stuck to the glass. Below, the gardens lie stiff and pale, the hedges frosted like stale cake. Someone has left a wheelbarrow tipped in the corner, half full of dirt clumps. The house is already awake. You hear boots stomping 2 floors below, probably the footman with coal for the sitting room fire. You wonder if he'll bring any to the nursery. Unlikely. The governess doesn't control coal rations. Today is your first full day alone with the children, and it starts with a wardrobe problem. Your usual grey wool dress is still damp from yesterday's rain. The only other option is a black cotton one with a high collar that itches. It makes you look even more harsh, like a widow who married Latin verbs instead of a man. You sigh and button it anyway. Downstairs, breakfast for the children has already been laid out. Clara eats soft eggs with white toast and raspberry jam. Felix has buttered crumpets and milk. You're handed a saucer with an apple and a half slice of brown bread, slightly stale. Not even tea. Clara smirks when she sees your breakfast. "Don't governesses like oatmeal?" she asks sweetly, lips stained faintly with jam. You pretend not to hear today's lesson plan, French verbs and plant sketching. You brought your own chalk for this, tucked into your case since seminary. You set up in the conservatory where sunlight softens the glass and makes the children squint. It's warmer here, at least. You guide them through the Latin names of plants: Salvia officinalis, Bellis perennis, Mentha piperita. But Felix is bored. Clara picks up a dead leaf and asks if it's a metaphor for your career. You blink. She's 9. By midday you retreat again to your room, but not for rest. You need to prepare your weekly report for the lady of the house, a summary of lessons, behaviour, progress. You keep your handwriting steady and your tone neutral, even though you want to write. Your daughter speaks cruelty with the grace of a duchess. Instead, you write. Clara shows increasing command of her vocabulary. Felix is spirited but responds well to structure lies, with pretty manners. You deliver the note to the silver tray outside the morning room. As you turn to leave, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the gilt mirror on the wall. The collar pinches your neck. Your face looks too old for your age, and your mouth has fallen into that small, tight line like Mrs. Crowthorne's had. Maybe all governesses eventually wear the same expression, the same mask. You return to your room for a moment. You sit on the bed and imagine removing the tight collar, putting on the old pale blue dress you wore to the school dance back at Mrs. Parsons'. You had laughed that night. Someone had held your hand. You close your eyes, just for a second. Then knock, knock, knock. No rest. Clara has lost her reading book and insists you help find it. You follow her to the nursery and crawl under furniture while she watches, arms crossed. The book is under her pillow. She laughs. You do not. Later that evening, you're called to the sitting room. Not to sit, of course, but to explain why Felix spelled Napoleon with 2 P's. The mistress is lounging with a needlepoint hoop, sipping something pale from a crystal glass. She barely looks at you as she speaks. "I expect my children to be properly educated, miss." She trails off, not out of rudeness, but genuine forgetfulness. You say your last name. She nods once, then returns to her stitching. You may go. You're dismissed like a fly waved from the cream. And yet, strangely, you're relieved. It could have been worse. At least she didn't ask why. Clara said you smelled like old books. Back in your room. You light the candle stub. The air feels colder tonight. You pace a little just to stay warm, thinking about governesses in novels, those dignified heroines with roguish suitors and tragic pasts. You once imagined yourself among them, now you know better. You boil water for tea, carefully pouring it into the cracked basin and dipping in a dusty packet of elderflower you'd saved from your last position. A small comfort, one of the few things still yours. As the tea steeps, you reach for the volume of Moral Instruction for Young Ladies on your windowsill. The margins are filled with your old notes, back when you still believed moral instruction was the way to rise, back when you hadn't yet seen how often the immoral thrived. Just fine. A sound interrupts your focus. A knock far down the hall, then hushed voices. You peek into the corridor. 2 maids whisper near the linen closet, unaware of you. "Did you hear what happened to the last governess?" One asks Mrs. Crowthorne. The other shrugs. Said she started talking to herself, writing poems on the schoolroom walls in chalk. The first nods. They sent her away in the rain. No references, poor soul. You pull back into your room. Close the door. Locks aren't for governesses. but you slide the wooden chair against it anyway. As you settle under your blanket, your mind wanders. Would you notice if you started to unravel like that? Would anyone? Or would they simply see a governess doing what governesses do, fading into her own thoughts, drifting from one position to the next like mist on a moor? You press your palm to the cracked window and draw a tiny line in the condensation, just to prove you're still here, that you still leave marks, even if they disappear. By morning, your fingers are shaking slightly, but whether it's the cold or something else, you can't quite say. You drink your tea slowly, saving the warmth, then lie back, staring at the beams again. The same beams Mrs. Crowthorne stared at. The same beams. Every governess learns by heart. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you start again, with no one ever really seeing you. No one but the children. And not even them, really. The morning brings frost and silence. You know better than to expect warmth now. Instead, you focus on small dignities, folding your shawl just right, brushing your hair into a tight coil, tying the lace collar that itches against your neck. Today, Clara has history and French dictation. Felix is supposed to write a letter to his cousin, but before lessons start, there's the matter of appearance, yours specifically. The lady of the house sends a note. Her maid brings it, folded on a silver tray, not even written by her own hand. Kindly ensure the governess adopts more neutral tones in her clothing. The black dress is too stark and may upset the children. Muted shades are preferable. You read it twice, then again, like it might say something different. It doesn't. Back in your room, you hold up your dresses. Grey or black. Those are your options. The muted shades she asks for are colours only the wealthy can afford. Moss green, soft lavender, pale dove blue, all too expensive for a governess's wardrobe. You choose the grey again. It's the one with the looser sleeves, easier for hiding ink stains. Downstairs, Clara studies your dress with narrowed eyes. Mama says you wear funeral colours, she announces. Is someone dead? You glance at her. Only my pride, you think? But say nothing. You begin dictation. Napoleon crossed the Alps with an army of but Felix is already drawing dragons in the margins of his paper. Clara holds her pen in mid-air, watching your every move, like she's trying to catch you doing something improper, blinking too fast, breathing too deeply. The scrutiny never stops. Not in the nursery, not in the hallway, not even during supper. When you eat alone in your room with a plate of pale stew and a damp roll, you miss colour not just in your clothes, but in your life. You think of Mrs. Parsons' seminary again. There was a girl there, Florence, who embroidered daisies onto the cuffs of her sleeve, lining so no one could see them but her. You used to laugh about it. Now you understand it, a little secret joy. You consider sewing something too, but you don't own a needle fine enough for such work. And even if you did, you're not sure what you'd embroider. A sun too hopeful, a cage too obvious. Maybe just a thread of red hidden under the hem where no one would notice. A reminder that you too once had warmth in your life. In the afternoon, the children are restless. You suggest a walk, but it's too cold. You suggest sketching. Clara declares it for babies. You settle on reading aloud. Felix chooses Gulliver's Travels, but insists on skipping the boring parts. Clara interrupts every 3 pages to ask why Gulliver didn't just become a governess if he was so miserable. She finds this incredibly funny. You do not. Later, you clean the slates, reorganise the inkwells, and smooth the corners of their exercise books. You could leave it all messy, but you can't help yourself. Control is all you have. A neat desk, a tidy bookshelf, the illusion of order. Just as you finish, you hear laughter in the hallway. Not the children, adults. You peek out and see the lady's cousin, Miss Eugenie, sweeping through the corridor in a seafoam green day dress with pearl buttons and a velvet purse. She pauses when she sees you. "Oh," she says. You nod politely. She doesn't nod back. She walks on. You close the schoolroom door quietly behind you, taking care not to let the latch click. The children have gone to the nursery for tea. You, of course, are not invited. A governess must always remember her place, present but never included in the solitude of your attic room. You begin mending your stockings. There's a hole near the toe that's grown too big to ignore. You stitch in silence, the thread pulling tight like a violin string, sharp and unforgiving. You've learned to make your few belongings last because replacements come at a price, and your salary is spoken for before it arrives. A quarter goes to your lodging agency. Another quarter is set aside for emergencies. That leaves little for anything beyond starch, soap and stamps you never use. The wardrobe creaks as you open it. A single petticoat hangs limp beside the grey and black dresses. You run your fingers over the fabric. It's the dullness that gets to you. Not just the colour, but the intention behind it. Everything you wear is designed to erase you. There's a reason governesses in portraits are always painted in shadow. No ribbons, no rouge, no patterns that might suggest a sense of joy. You're meant to look respectable, but not too refined. Modest, but not matronly. Attractive enough to suggest intelligence, but never desire. You remember a governess at your seminary who wore a pale green brooch to a school inspection, a leaf made of glass. Delicate, almost glowing. The inspector told her it was inappropriate. She was asked to remove it. That same week she was dismissed for being too visible. Too visible? It echoes in your mind. That's what this life demands. Not skill, not grace, not education or empathy or endurance, just invisibility. You wonder if the children notice how little you own. They must. Clara notices everything. Maybe that's why she asked whether governesses ever get married. Like, marriage is a prize you gave up long ago. She said it like an insult, but she couldn't know the weight of it. You used to dream of love. Not in the passionate way of novels, but the quiet kind. A hand reaching for yours at supper, a voice that says your name like it matters. Now, when someone says your name, it's usually followed by an instruction. Miss, fetch the primer, or Miss, mind the ink. Or simply Miss, like your full identity is too troublesome to remember. You fold your stockings and place them beside your shoes. The soles are thinning. You'll need to line them with newspaper soon, just as Miss Crowthorne once did. You used to think her shabby. Now you understand her. Thrift was a form of defiance, quiet rebellion. You light your candle early tonight, not out of luxury, but because the sky's already dark. At 4:30 outside, the mist thickens into something heavier. Maybe fog. Maybe just your imagination. You sit by the window and stare down at the hedge maze. You've never walked it. Governesses don't stroll the grounds unless accompanied, but still you trace its shape with your eyes. In the middle there's a stone bench. The children once mentioned it. Clara said it was where lovers used to meet before the war. Felix said it smelled like worms. You wonder what it smells like now. Later you write in your journal. Just a few lines. Today I was spoken to 4 times. Once for a mistake that wasn't mine. Once for something forgotten. Twice in passing. You stop there. You want to write more, but there's no space between the lines that doesn't hurt. The children arrive 10 minutes late to the schoolroom. Clara has powdered sugar on her sleeves and Felix is dragging a wooden sword. You take a breath, straighten your posture, and greet them like they haven't just burst in like tiny conquerors. Today's lesson is obedience, or at least it should be. You begin with scripture, reading from Proverbs about wisdom and discipline. Clara yawns dramatically. Felix draws horns on his copybook angel. You press on even as your voice goes hoarse. It's not the disobedience that stings. It's how well they've learned it from above. After all, they're simply copying the rules of the house. You say, let's try handwriting. They hear, time to test boundaries. Felix knocks over the inkwell. Clara claims you brushed her hair too hard the day before. You didn't. She hadn't brushed it at all, and the tangles were like wire. Still, the lady of the house appears at the door within 10 minutes. Her dress smells faintly of violets. She doesn't ask you what happened. She crouches beside Clara, strokes her hair, and gives you a look like you've just shouted obscenities instead of quietly reciting from Pilgrim's Progress. Perhaps Miss should reconsider her tone. She says children are sensitive. You lower your eyes and murmur an apology again. This is the third this week. You wonder if governesses in France are treated this way. Probably. Maybe worse. Felix is now fighting with a curtain rod. You take it away. He sulks for the rest of the lesson and refuses to conjugate a single verb. By midday you're exhausted, not physically, but in that deep, grinding way that settles behind the eyes. You sit on the schoolroom window ledge while the children eat lunch downstairs. You aren't hungry, and besides, the maid has forgotten your tray again. You imagine what would happen if you simply walked out the door, packed your bag, left your reference letter, and took the next coach anywhere. You could become a seamstress, or maybe a companion to a blind widow who doesn't require Latin verbs and needlepoint. But then you remember the agency still holds part of your wages in trust. Leave without notice and you lose it entirely. Your gloves are wearing thin. You can't afford defiance. After lunch, the children return in higher spirits. Clara plays scales on the piano, slamming the keys with more energy than grace. Felix draws moustaches on all the monarchs in his history book. You try to guide their hands, their minds, their moods. But children, like the English weather, do not answer to governesses. By mid-afternoon, Clara asks if she may write her own story instead of copying passages. You agree, grateful for the initiative. She returns 20 minutes later with a tale about a governess who turns into a beetle and is swept away with a broom. Felix laughs so hard he spills ink on the carpet. You take away the story, your fingers trembling slightly. Clara shrugs. It's just pretend. You manage a smile. Yes, you say pretend, but your hands are cold and the story is not pretend enough. You place Clara's story in the drawer of the schoolroom desk and close it gently like it might leap out and sting you. In another life, you would admire her wit. In this one, you're the insect in her tail, crushed between two social classes and swept away. When convenient, afternoon lessons drift into chaos. Felix refuses arithmetic entirely. You barely hear Clara's French dictation, catching her intentional errors before she giggles at them. Your corrections come steady, patient. Your voice doesn't sound gentle to you, just clipped. You keep glancing toward the door, expecting the mistress to storm in, ready to twist your calm into cruelty. When the children leave for tea, you stay to straighten the schoolroom. You blot spilled ink, align the maps, organise the readers. It's your private ritual of endurance, forcing order onto a world that pretends you don't exist. The iron garlic smell won't leave your hands, even with scrubbing. You take the back staircase up to your attic room. The steps are narrow, worn smooth in the centre from generations of silent footsteps. You think about all the governesses who climbed before you, each one carrying identical burdens of swallowed complaints. Your dinner tray sits by the door, a shallow bowl of barley soup, a bread crust, and watery tea. No napkin tonight. You balance the meal on your lap, studying the peeling wallpaper where a faded pattern still lingers. Perhaps roses, perhaps just moisture stains. When you finish, you light your candle and retrieve the unmailed letters. 3 of them now, all meant for Amelia but never sent. The paper feels cheap and flimsy. You whisper the last one aloud, craving the sound of a human voice in the space. Dearest Amelia, Clara wrote a story today about a governess transforming into a beetle. Maybe it's accurate, dear friend. You leave the signature incomplete. You tuck the letter under your pillow. Beyond the window, the estate settles into evening. Through the cracked glass, you smell coal smoke from the main chimney blending with the damp scent of turned soil. Kitchen bells chime somewhere below, distant marks of hours beyond your control. You remember other governesses from hiring fairs, Wan women with anxious smiles and threadbare gloves standing beneath leaking roofs while agents assessed their posture like livestock. Some had taught a decade, some 20 years. Yet there they stood, waiting for another position, lives measured in trunks and letters of recommendation. You picture yourself among them eventually, your gloves mended, your references aging. You wonder if you'll still know your own reflection. You doubt it. You pull the curtain, climb into the narrow bed and draw the blanket to your chin. From the nursery beneath comes the faint melody of a music box, the tune slightly warped from being overwound. It's Clara's favourite, imported from Vienna. You find yourself humming along before you stop. The candle burns down. Shadows ripple across the slanted ceiling like ink spreading through water. You close your eyes and breathe. Tomorrow brings more lessons. Tomorrow you'll fasten the same collar, smooth the same hair, speak the same kind words. Maybe tomorrow Clara will compose a different story. Or perhaps you will. It begins, as it frequently does, with the clink of a teacup, not intended for you. You're walking down the hallway carrying a rolled map of the British Empire when you reach the morning room. The door stands open. Inside, the mistress sits with her visiting sister, drinking Darjeeling from porcelain so delicate it's almost transparent. They're conversing quietly, but not quietly enough. She seems so severe, the sister remarks, like she's never found joy in anything. The mistress touches her lip delicately with a monogrammed napkin. Governesses shouldn't be pleasant. That was the trouble with Miss What's-Her-Name. Again you wait, not curious, but because the name they're searching for belongs to you. A moment passes, then the sister says it incorrectly. You continue walking before they spot you, your expression empty, your shoulders stiff enough to reveal that yes, you heard. In the schoolroom, Clara waits with folded arms and one glove removed. She demands to know why her embroidery thread hasn't come. It's not in the curriculum, you explain gently. She sulks. Mother claims governesses used to teach needlework. Are you too progressive? You smile in a way that means don't test me. But naturally she does. She also claims you watch Papa. Your hand freezes over the attendance ledger. Clara's eyes shine. I don't, you say, voice even. She shrugs. That's not what she claims. You glance at Felix, but he's occupied spinning his inkwell on the table edge like a gambling wheel. It wobbles and drops with a thud, but mercifully stays sealed. You gather yourself. You resume the lesson. But something changed, because now you're not simply the governess. You're the topic of discussion, rumour, doubt, and worse still, you're noticed. You spend the remaining morning carefully folding yourself back into obscurity. You speak more quietly. You sit farther from the children during dictation. You keep your hands folded. When the master passes the schoolroom door that afternoon, you don't raise your eyes, but you sense his presence, briefly, a trace of bay rum and fresh leather. You feel your pulse quicken, then slow. You won't give them anything more to discuss. Still, later when you're alone, organising readers, cleaning chalk from the slates, your thoughts drift not toward him but toward the brutality of it all. How a glance can destroy you, how a child's thoughtless remark can turn a household against you, without evidence, without understanding, without hesitation. Below they have tea with preserves and cream. Above you have quiet and a cup of water gone lukewarm. You go back to your room and open your drawer. Inside sits the small round mirror you carried from seminary. The silver's tarnished by now, but it still shows enough. You rehearse a smile not from vanity but from necessity, a gentle blank expression, neither too friendly nor too distant, the kind governesses display when being observed from across a drawing room. You'll wear it tomorrow, and the following day, and every day afterward, until maybe they forget your name again. That evening you eat in your room again. The tray holds a bowl of parsnip soup and a stale bread heel. No butter, not that you anticipated any. You eat deliberately, not from hunger, but because prolonging the moment provides something to occupy you. Afterward you sit by your window planning the following day's lessons. British monarchs, map exercises, a passage from the Tempest. You debate skipping the love scene. It could encourage more gossip, but then again Shakespeare is always considered acceptable. Until it's not. As you make margin notes, the wind shakes the window pane. You picture the mistress and her sister downstairs, draped in shawls, still drinking their tea, still discussing you in clipped phrases and trailing thoughts. She watches Papa. Her voice is so monotone, not exactly attractive. Adequate is she. You don't fault them, not completely. You occupy a space meant to disturb. Educated yet dependent, visible yet socially uncertain. A woman without a man, without money, and without a place at the table. You are, by your position alone, a disruption contained in proper posture. Earlier you caught the kitchen maid speaking to the housekeeper. Governesses always believe they're superior to us until they wind up in proper service. You're uncertain what hurts more, that it was spoken, or that it could be your reality someday. You examine your hands, ink-stained fingers. You wash them every night, but the blue lingers faintly beneath the nails. You wonder if your hands would ever soften again if you stopped teaching. You tuck your lesson outline into your satchel, extinguish the candle and climb into bed. But your mind won't settle. You think of other governesses you've encountered briefly, like Miss Weatherby, who once instructed 4 boys in Sussex and was dismissed when the oldest turned 15 and grew too interested in her Latin lessons. Or Miss Jones, who developed pneumonia in an attic room and was replaced before her fever subsided. None of them were unkind. None of them were reckless. They were simply noticed at the wrong time. Tomorrow you'll be more subdued. You'll let Clara speak over you. You'll chuckle softly at Felix's improper jokes. You'll wear the grey dress again, the one with the plainest collar. You'll make yourself tinier, not because it's just, but because it's required. As you fall asleep, you wonder how much longer you can maintain this, existing within boundaries so tight they could barely contain a name. And what would occur if just once you crossed them? Would they dismiss you? Or worse, would they actually see you? The rain hasn't ceased since daybreak, a steady grey sheet streaming down the schoolroom windows like sluggish ink. You came early to clean the slates and arrange the chairs. Gestures of discipline, not obligation. The children will be restless today. Rainy days always awaken something wild in them. You had planned an outdoor geometry lesson using hoops and rods, angles measured by shadows, but that idea drowned with the garden. Instead, you're adapting again. Clara enters in a terrible mood, her hair slightly wet, her boots squeaking with every step. Felix trails behind with a slice of jam tart he shouldn't have brought upstairs. He consumes it with deliberate satisfaction, sugar clinging to his chin. You ask them to begin reciting the kings and queens of England. Clara declines. Felix pretends to forget every name except King Poopy Pants the First. You try firmness, but barely. You're conscious now of every word, every inflection, every look. Invisible, yes, but only until someone chooses to search for flaws. You assign copywork and leave to collect more quills. As you pass the drawing room, you halt again, not by intention but by sound. Laughter emerges, refined and rehearsed. The mistress is hosting guests. You hear the clink of porcelain, the whisper of skirts, the heavy pause before a joke concludes. You think nothing of it until you catch your own name. The governess, a low voice says. Unfamiliar? What's she like? Oh. Reserved, the mistress responds lightly, stays to herself. As they ought. We did experience difficulties with the previous one, but this one's, well, she wears grey. They laugh. That's all it requires, you understand. Grey. That's what they perceive. Not credentials, not years of education. Not the way you manage tantrums or teach French irregulars or guide Clara through her arithmetic tears. Just grey, just present. You return to the schoolroom, colder than earlier. Felix has dipped his fingers in ink and pressed them against the window pane like some disturbed art project. Clara is silently tearing the edge of her reader into tiny fragments and sprinkling them into the fireplace. You say nothing initially, just observe. Then, calmly, you remove the ink pot and hand Felix a cloth. You sit beside Clara and ask her to explain the metaphor in the poem she was given. She shrugs and says, "It's about being confined, obviously. The clock ticks. By the time lessons conclude, your nerves are stretched thin. The children rush off for nursery tea and you stay behind, wiping chalk from your palms. You glance out the window again. A delivery cart departs from the house on the gravel. A footman retrieves something dropped, a box of imported biscuits, maybe for the afternoon guests. A small luxury carefully protected. You've never tried one. It shouldn't affect you, but it does. Later that evening, as the wind rattles the leaded windows and the floorboards creak with footsteps not intended for you, a maid knocks at your door. You look up, surprised. No one ever visits here unless there's been an error or a complaint. The girl, no older than 16, stands awkwardly in the doorway, holding a tea tray. Not the chipped one either. This one is polished silver, the kind they use in the morning room. On it, a small pot of proper Earl Grey, 2 shortbread biscuits, and a slice of something pale and delicate. Almond sponge, you suspect. She doesn't meet your eye. From the mistress, she says, not quite believably. You hesitate. It could be a gesture of peace, or it could be a trap. Still you accept it with a nod and thank her. She leaves without another word. You close the door softly, set the tray down, and sit for a moment. You simply observe it. The sponge cake is flawless, cleanly sliced, no crumbs. A sliver of apricot jam gleaming between layers. You haven't had anything like this in months, not since you departed Miss Parsons and your friend Amelia smuggled a tart from the dining hall on your final day. That was lemon. This is superior. You take one bite, then another. You chew slowly, not just for manners, but to postpone the return to the room. The rain, the silence. The tea is hot, aromatic, not the metallic brew they typically give you. You wonder if this is compassion or manipulation. Did the mistress feel remorse after the drawing room comments? Or does she simply wish to keep you compliant, pleasant, and grey? Because here's the reality you've learned. They don't want to destroy you, not fully. A destroyed governess must be replaced, and that's inconvenient. No, they want you tamed, silent, appreciative, smoothed at the edges, just conscious enough to be functional. You sip the tea. It works slightly. You feel your pulse calm. Later, you return to your letters. You pull the one from beneath your pillow, the one with the line about Clara's story about the beetle, and add a few more words. P.S. I received sponge cake tonight. I'm not certain whether to consume it gratefully or question what it signifies. I did both. You fold it, sigh, and place it with the others. As you prepare for bed, you notice something odd. The schoolroom door downstairs stands ajar. You tiptoe down, candle in hand, curious. No one should be there. Inside, the maps have been left unfurled. The chalkboard hasn't been cleaned. But what catches your attention is Clara's copybook lying open, and in her tilting hand she's written something across the bottom margin. Governesses aren't supposed to possess feelings. You stare at it, then you close the book softly. Back upstairs, you lie in bed, trying to determine if this is malice or wonder. You think of Clara's mother, her powdered cheeks, the way she wields gentleness as a weapon. You wonder if Clara is merely learning from the master. The candle flickers. You lie awake longer than typical, thinking of feelings you aren't supposed to possess and shortbread you weren't supposed to accept, and a line written by a child that somehow understands exactly where to wound. And still tomorrow you'll go back to that room. You'll smile and instruct, because that's what governesses do, even when they're not supposed to feel. You wake to a thin band of light crossing the floorboards. The kind of light that suggests spring but holds no warmth. It's Sunday. a governess's only official break. No lessons, no grammar exercises, no spilled ink, but not rest either. You rise slowly, dress in your best grey, and pin your hair precisely. Sundays are for presentation. The household processes to church like a procession. Children polished, the mistress in her dove-coloured bonnet, the master in his tall hat and muffler. And you following behind, invisible yet intensely visible simultaneously. Downstairs, the butler gives you a prayer book. Not yours, just the one they maintain for staff. The edges are bent and someone's penciled tedious over a verse in Psalms. You slip it into your pocket. Outside, the air is crisp. The gravel path crunches under your boots. Clara and Felix dash ahead. The mistress calls after them, but not severely. Her voice is gentle for others to witness. At the church gate, you're reminded of your station once more. The family enters their pew. You take the side bench alone. It's always this way. You sit upright, face blank, while the vicar speaks about obedience and duty. His voice is polished, practiced. You try to concentrate on the words, but your eyes drift up to the high stone arches, the stained glass windows, the dust particles that float like phantom petals in the morning sun. You wonder if Miss Crowthorne used to sit here, if she observed these same particles and felt equally adrift. You imagine her composing poems in chalk in the schoolroom just before the dismissal, just before the silence after the sermon. You walk behind the family again, distant enough to signal separation, close enough to be called if necessary. Back at the house, the household retreats to their Sunday routines. The mistress naps with a lavender sachet. The master smokes by the hearth. Clara practices her scales poorly, and Felix disappears, probably to terrorise the stable cats. You return to your room. You boil water for tea and sit by the window with your old letters. Today feels weightier. Perhaps it's the sermon or the silence or the slow realisation that no one notices whether you smile or don't, whether you speak or don't, whether you're here or eventually gone. You take up your pencil and open your journal. This time you don't write about lessons or ink spills or overheard whispers. You write about isolation, not the romantic kind, the actual kind, the kind that seeps into your joints and settles like dampness, the kind that accompanies you through corridors and sits across from you at supper. You write. It is peculiar to feel so surrounded and yet so completely alone. Even the prayers today seem to pass by me like birds avoiding the wrong branch. You stop, not because you've exhausted thoughts, but because it's sufficient, more than sufficient. You fold the journal closed and sit back. From downstairs, you hear laughter, muffled but genuine. You can almost identify who it belongs to, but no one calls your name, not even accidentally. Afternoon deepens into stillness. The house quiets as if covered in velvet. You wander the corridor slowly, not out of defiance, but out of need. You've been confined too long in the attic room, and the walls seem to be closing inward. There's no rule that prohibits you from walking the upper halls on a Sunday, though of course there's no rule that permits you either. You pause outside the library. The door is ajar. You push it gently. Inside, the dark wood shelves, the scent of old leather, a fireplace reduced to embers, and silence thick enough to envelop you. No one is here. You drift toward the shelves, eyes scanning familiar titles. The Iliad, the Canterbury Tales, Jane Eyre. Somewhat ironic. Your fingers pause on a slim red volume of poetry. Tennyson. You pull it out. It feels like a borrowed heartbeat. You sink into the window seat with the book on your lap. For a moment, you're nobody. Not the governess, not the ghost in the grey dress. Just a woman reading. You lose yourself in the verses. The words bloom in your mind like small rebellions. When was the last time you read for pleasure? Not aloud, not to explain or assess. Just for yourself? You don't know how long you sit there, but the light has shifted by the time you hear footsteps. You snap the book shut and rise quickly, too quickly, The master stands in the doorway, a letter in one hand, brow slightly lifted. He doesn't look irritated, just surprised. "Oh," he says. "Miss." He doesn't finish. You clutch the book tightly. "My apologies," you murmur. "I needed air." He nods once. "Of course." A pause then. "That's one of my favourites too." You blink. "The poetry." You nod, uncertain if you should thank him or escape. "I'll leave you to it," he says, stepping aside. You walk past him carefully. Your skirt brushes his coat. You feel the warmth of his presence as you pass. Not inappropriate, not even close, but enough to disturb the silence that had settled around you like dust. Back in your room, you place the book on your washstand. You didn't intend to take it, but your fingers never let go. You sit. The encounter replays in your mind repeatedly. He addressed you as if you mattered. That's dangerous. Not because you'll pursue it, you won't, but because of what it stirs, some old part of you, long buried, the part that remembers being admired, addressed, seen. You pull out your journal again and write nothing. Instead, you draw a line, then another, a figure in grey standing beneath a stained glass window. Around her the pews are empty. Her hands are folded, her head bowed. She could be praying or simply existing. You stare at her. She stares back. As the sun slips below the hedgerows outside, you light your candle and place the red book beneath your pillow, not to keep it, but to borrow its presence for one more night. You tell yourself it's just poetry, but in truth it's evidence that once today someone saw you and didn't turn away. The Monday morning after church feels weightier than typical. You wake early, the red book still beneath your pillow, slightly bent from where your head rested on it. You smooth it flat again and set it atop the washstand, uncertain whether to return it quietly today or wait and pretend you forgot. Downstairs, the air feels colder, as if the house itself disapproves of your borrowed poetry and wandering thoughts. Thoughts. You dress quickly, loop your hair into the usual tight coil, and check your shoes for new wear. The soles are thinning again. You'll need to pack them with newspaper before long. The last time you used a page torn from an abandoned sermon. The children are running late once more. While you sit in the schoolroom waiting, you arrange copywork pages and drop a fresh nib into each inkwell. Small rituals, dependable routines, and they steady you. When the children finally show up, something's different in them. Clara stays quiet without the usual pouting. Felix doesn't push back when you tell him to start his arithmetic. Something's changed, though you can't say what exactly. Only when the housemaid walks past and hovers just a beat too long in the corridor do you piece it together. You've become the subject of talk again, more than normal this time. Not just in parlours, in the servants' quarters, in hushed tones over tea service and coat racks. Because someone spotted you in the library the other day, someone caught you staying too long, someone witnessed the master speaking to you, not with sternness, not with indifference, but with gentleness. Far too much gentleness. And that's enough. You've turned into gossip now, and gossip, particularly the variety involving governesses, seldom works out in your favour. You attempt to continue as though nothing's happened. You teach about explorers. You fix Felix's handwriting. You have Clara read out loud, and she complies, rigidly, without her typical theatrical smugness, though she refuses to look your way. By mid-morning, the atmosphere grows thick enough to cut. The mistress enters without a knock, a folded letter held in her fingers. Her expression is pinched tight. Her dress is grey silk, similar to yours in shade, but infinitely more costly. "Miss," she announces, "you stand." "This was discovered in the schoolroom," she goes on, extending the paper. "Clara authored it, I suspect. You ought to see." You unfold the sheet. It's a letter written to nobody. Perhaps just an exercise, but the words are clear as day. Governesses fall in love as well, but they shouldn't. Your throat tightens, she states. She imagined it, the mistress adds in a cold tone. Naturally. though imaginations don't conjure things from thin air. You attempt to respond, you say, "I can assure you." But she lifts a hand. "I refuse to have scandal in this household," she declares, her gaze flat. "Nor will I permit distraction from the children's lessons. You're employed to fulfill a role, miss, not to attract attention, not to be noticed." The words land cold and cutting. She pivots without awaiting your response. The door shuts behind her with a click. You remain standing there, pulse racing, letter still gripped in your hand. On the page, Clara's penmanship winds like climbing vines, graceful, looping, treacherous. You fold it once, then again, before slipping it into your pocket. You'll burn it later, but right now you teach, because that's your function, even while you're being erased. You don't weep, not because you possess great strength necessarily, but because weeping in this household feels like offering someone else a victory. You absorbed that lesson during your second position, when tears resulted not in sympathy, but in whispers of instability. "She's not entirely sound," they'd murmured, "a bit too sensitive." You never let yourself forget. So instead, you clean the chalkboard, you shine the doorknob, you refresh the slates with ink, and you tuck every feeling into the precise corners of tomorrow's lesson plan, where it won't damage your standing. That evening, the household seems to be suspended in stillness. The music room sits empty. The children dine in the nursery. You're not invited to join, though you never have been. You remain in your room with a red poetry volume resting in your lap, the spine warm from being held. You run your thumb over the gilt letters, then stand slowly, tuck it into your satchel and slip down the servants' staircase. You place it back on the library shelf without a sound, sliding it carefully between the odes and the Fairy Queen. It isn't yours. Nothing here belongs to you. On your return trip upstairs, you move past the scullery. The maid notices you and stops her work momentarily. She regards you, truly regards you. Then she remarks, "I've heard you're leaving soon." Your stomach plummets. "Who mentioned that?" you inquire, voice level, too level. She offers a shrug, cutting into a beat with her thumb perilously near the blade. Word travels. You nod a single time, then depart, before she witnesses your fingers ball into fists. Upstairs, you settle at your desk and retrieve a sheet of paper. Not correspondence this time, a black dress. Mend gloves, repair, left thumb. Fare for journey back to agency. Food for the road, dried apples. Reference. You stare at that final item. Will they provide one? Will it contain anything meaningful? Even the lack of commendation carries significance in your profession. A reference stating she was punctual serves as a warning in itself. You fold the paper and set it beside your journal. Later you lie sleepless, not with grief, but with planning. You have 2 weeks remaining in this position, maybe 3, if the mistress postpones official termination. You cannot afford errors. No sentiment, no direct looks, no lingering in hallways. You'll start writing to agencies again tomorrow, back to the interview rooms, the long benches, the stares of middle-aged gentlemen who check your birth date, then examine your face and frown. At 28, you're not quite youthful enough to appear fresh, nor mature enough to seem essential. You recall once overhearing someone remark, "Governesses are like candles, valuable until they've burned too low to provide light." As you slip towards sleep, the house groans and adjusts around you. Your pillow carries a faint scent of starch and something deeper, your own anxiety perhaps. Downstairs, the master and mistress withdraw to their quarters behind locked doors, separated from you by wealth, by status, by silence. You wonder whether they rest easily. You don't. But eventually you do drift off, because even candles continue burning until they're extinguished. By the next morning, the mood in the schoolroom has turned fragile, like glass that's been bent just enough to fracture but hasn't yet broken apart. Clara displays her finest behaviour, which means she's suspiciously pleasant. She appears early, positions her copybook precisely at the centre of her desk, and addresses you with a smile that's too balanced to be genuine. Felix, in contrast, broods from the beginning. He shuffles his feet, gazes at the ceiling, and grumbles about everyone acting strange. You start with geography, capital cities, shipping lanes, neutral, unemotional information, blessedly clinical. But while you list the exports of the West Indies, you sense Clara's attention on you, observing, evaluating. She lifts her hand. Yes, Clara. She pauses just long enough to make it deliberate. What's the capital of being forgotten? Felix erupts in laughter. You blink, and in that moment you grasp that she understands. Perhaps not everything, but sufficient. Children observe more than adults credit them for, and the sharp ones, they notice absolutely everything. The exchange between adults, the forced tone, the way your mouth tightens when the mistress appears. Clara is probing you, not from cruelty necessarily, but from curiosity, to determine if she can penetrate your surface, to see whether you'll react. You smile. Melancholy, you respond without missing a moment. Clara's eyes widen. Felix quits laughing. You proceed with the lesson. By noon, the tension has transformed. Clara stops smirking. Felix continues fidgeting but won't make eye contact. You suspect they've been informed of something. Maybe that you're departing. Maybe that you deserve sympathy. You catch the mistress's voice from downstairs during lunch, directing someone to contact the agency. Her voice projects when she's annoyed, even when she thinks it doesn't. You consume your lunch at your desk today. It's bland chicken and bread minus butter, and you scan through the children's dictation. Felix spelled responsibility as wrong-sponsibility. You catch yourself smiling momentarily, then halt. You can't permit yourself to grow tender now. During the afternoon, Clara passes you a folded note. From me, she states, then quickly moves away. You hold off until you're by yourself to read it. Inside, you're better than this house, that's everything. No signature, no regret, no real sentiment. But something inside your chest moves. You tuck the note in your satchel next to the now constant packing list. Not because you'll preserve it indefinitely, but because someone, however briefly, voiced the unmentionable aloud. The remainder of the day unfolds quietly. Clara completes her copywork without objection. Felix doesn't dispute his Latin verbs. At one moment, Clara even extends you the remainder of her biscuit, though she approaches it like a scientific trial. You politely refuse. Later, you collect your materials, as usual, the lesson plan, the chalk, the reader. You push Clara's note further into your case, then shut the lid with a gentle click. Outside, the clouds are dispersing. Just a sliver of brightness cuts over the stone terrace. It resembles a goodbye or a fresh start, you can't quite determine which. That evening you do something rash, not by general standards, but for a governess in a household where even a moderately elevated voice qualifies as defiance, it borders on rebellion. You enter the sitting room. Not the library, not the schoolroom, the sitting room. It stands empty now, the fire diminished to soft embers and a dish of orange rinds abandoned on the tray. Someone, probably the mistress, has draped a velvet shawl over the armchair. You don't touch it. You don't take a seat. You merely stand there briefly, allowing the warmth to reach your hands. Then you cross to the small writing desk beneath the mirror. Inside the drawer, the ledger, the red one, the household ledger, where matters are documented not for transparency, but for discreet surveillance. The cook's supply orders, the seamstress's hours, and, yes, your name. You turn gently until you locate it there, recorded in a precise, severe hand. Ms. T, to be dismissed upon agency response. Final compensation to be withheld pending. Condition of schoolroom and linens under review. You close the ledger quietly. No shock, but it still feels different when it's written down. Later, you sit in your room, candlelight wavering as you fold your dresses one by one. You arrange them carefully in your trunk, using layers of newspaper to cushion the hems. It's routine by now, packing, repacking, departing before you've ever genuinely settled. On the interior flap of the trunk, you've scratched tiny initials across time. Just once for each position, a private ceremony, you add another WH for Windmere House. Beneath that, the others, a silent grey cemetery of initials. You place your gloves on top. You'll polish your boots in the morning, verify train fare, and when the agency responds, you'll depart once more. You lie awake that night and listen not to sounds or footsteps, but to emptiness, the variety of silence that sounds like a verdict, the type of quiet that doesn't conclude, but simply waits to be transported to another room. Sleep arrives slowly and just before it claims you. You wonder what your next household will be like, which stairs you'll ascend, what cold breakfast you'll receive, which child will initially ask, "Are you married?" You no longer respond, "Not yet." You now reply no with finality, the sort that leaves no opening for questions. Tomorrow, you'll compose your own letter to the agency. You'll request somewhere quieter, perhaps fewer children, somewhere near the ocean, if feasible. Not because you'll have opportunity to visit it, but because you'd like to smell salt in the breeze. When you crack open a window just once, just for yourself, before you're boxed up again, like a well-used textbook transported to a new shelf and instructed to begin all over, you shut your eyes and the house vanishes one beam at a time. The letter departs. The following morning you compose it early, before the schoolroom awakens, before the agency's office even unlocks its entrance. In London, you word it carefully, controlled, respectful, but not submissive. To whom it may concern, I will shortly be seeking a new position. The current household is pursuing a replacement. I have executed my responsibilities without complication and remain available until appropriate transition is completed. You don't mention Clara or the mistress or the red ledger you've learned by truth isn't valuable in these circles. Tone matters politeness, discretion, and a properly constructed paragraph. You seal the letter with wax, not red. You possess no official seal but a drop of candlelight pressed with your thimble. It suffices. The maid accepts it, expression blank. By breakfast, the household feels lighter, not because anything has shifted, but because you have. The awareness of departure settles over you like a second shawl, protective, essential. The children appear later than typical. You're not surprised. What does catch you off guard is Clara's manner. She says good morning, not with sarcasm, not with performance, just simply. Felix carries the map case without being prompted. He even opens the door for you. There's a hesitation to both of them now, as if your coming absence has gentled the edges of their meanness, or perhaps made them recognise that you were never a permanent fixture, never part of the wallpaper. You were always temporary. Today, you teach literature. You select The Tempest, returning to it with attention. Felix dozes off midway through, but Clara pays attention. You read aloud. This thing of darkness. I acknowledge mine. She inquires what it signifies. You explain gently. It's about claiming what's been concealed, owning what others would prefer to dismiss. She blinks, says nothing, but maintains eye contact. After lunch, the children draw maps. You assume your typical spot at the desk, sharpening pencils, straightening the compass set. As you work, you sense a presence at the entrance. Another governess. She stands there, hesitant, one foot inside, the other still outside. She's young, innocent-looking, clutching a satchel like it might attack her. You recognise that expression. You displayed it once. The mistress materialises behind her. "This is Miss Hargrave," she states briskly. "She'll be watching for several days." Clara's eyes go wide. Felix instantly asks if she can do impressions. You rise, nod, present a courteous smile. The mistress doesn't acknowledge you. She only addresses the newcomer. There will be a formal handover, but please observe carefully. We prioritise discipline here. You sense Clara's stare. Shift to you, then to the newcomer. Miss Hargrave smiles anxiously. You've been replaced. Not terminated, not blamed, simply substituted. Courteously, professionally, and with no more ritual than a replaced teacup. That's the way it occurs. Not with drama, but with a nod and a thank you for your service. Ms. Hargrave watches your every action that afternoon, pen suspended above her notebook, eyes darting between your posture, your tone, your selection of reading material. You feel her attention as a persistent weight on your shoulder. She doesn't speak unless addressed. Already she's absorbed one of the first and most lasting lessons of a governess. Silence proves safer than charisma. You guide her through the schedule, which slates to utilize, which books the children accept. How Clara reacts best to praise wrapped in reasoning, not empty compliments. How Felix pretends to forget Latin, but secretly retains it when nobody's looking. She nods, scribbles, smiles, excessively. She'll learn. Clara is unusually subdued during dictation. She doesn't present Ms. Hargrave her drawings, doesn't complain about the lighting, just completes her work, lips compressed like she's restraining something sharp and carefully constructed. Felix, on the other hand, experiments. Will the new governess permit us to play cricket in the hallway? You raise an eyebrow. Ms. Hargrave blinks. I don't believe that would be suitable. Felix sulks. You observe the gears turning. He's already searching for vulnerabilities. When lessons conclude, Clara remains. You gather the copybooks and begin to arrange the chairs, back facing away. She stays quiet a moment. Then I like the way you read the stories. You pause, pivot. Her hands are clasped behind her back. Her eyes are locked on a crack in the floorboard. I don't want a new governess. You say nothing for an extended moment because what could you say? That it's not her decision. That this was unavoidable. That caring for someone isn't sufficient, not in houses like this. Instead, you offer the single truth you can manage. I liked teaching you, Clara. She nods one crisp bob. Then she exits the schoolroom with more dignity than you believed her capable of. You stand there alone, fingers still touching the back of a child's chair, the new governess's pencil mark still resonating faintly behind your ears. You think of all the rooms you've stood in like this, all the occasions you've said quiet farewells to children who, hours before, tried to undermine your lessons or imitated your voice in the hallway. This is the pattern always. Resistance, then remorse. But only when it's secure, only when you're already halfway gone. You ascend the attic stairs, with heavier steps that evening. Your trunk is almost complete now, just your nightdress and hairbrush remaining and the small stack of unsent letters wedged between your journal pages. You ignite the candle, kneel beside the trunk, and open the journal one final time. You write, "Today I began vanishing not with disgrace but with formality. I don't know which is worse." You close the book. You'll abandon it for the next governess, or perhaps for nobody. But regardless, it belongs to this house now, like everything else you contributed. The morning you're scheduled to leave arrives with pale sunlight and a heavy silence. No celebration, no farewell. Your trunk is ready. The final items, hairbrush, nightdress, the borrowed poetry book returned discreetly the previous night, are gone now, either stored or relinquished. You wear the grey wool dress with the tidy hem and worn cuffs. It appears almost respectable from a distance, and that's all anyone here has ever required. Miss Hargrave appears early. You hand her the key to the schoolroom cabinet and a carefully written list of where the supplies are stored. She thanks you, voice nervous but enthusiastic, and places the list into her satchel like a treasure. She doesn't realise yet that the ink bottles drip, that the map of the colonies is incorrect, that the children will use kindness as an examination and cruelty as protection. You don't warn her. Certain things must be discovered firsthand. Clara appears 5 minutes late, her braid fastened with a violet ribbon instead of the standard navy. A small rebellion or a gesture, you can't determine. Felix follows, pulling a slate and chewing on a crust of toast. You begin the lesson one final time. Not from obligation, from routine, from determination. They copy lines from The Tempest again, the identical passage. You observe them write slowly, intentionally. Felix spells stranger. A stranger. Clara pauses midway through to look at you. She doesn't speak. Neither do you. When the lesson concludes, you nod to Miss Hargrave, collect your gloves and satchel, and walk quietly toward the entrance. Then you hear it. Miss Clara's voice. You turn. She stands gripping her copybook. I know I was. She begins, then halts. I didn't mean to. The words collapse like paper in her throat. You nod. I know. She takes a step nearer. You weren't like the others. You smile. An authentic one. I know it's sufficient. Felix mutters something about beetles and wipes his nose on his sleeve. You exit the schoolroom for the final time. At the base of the stairs, the butler waits with your trunk. He doesn't offer to transport it. Naturally not. He simply opens the front entrance. The mistress is nowhere visible, the master also missing. Only the sound of morning birds, the clatter of a distant cart. You step outside. The wind catches the edge of your scarf and you press it down again. The agency's coach will arrive shortly. 3 more stops, 3 more interviews, 3 more polite rejections from houses with superior options. But you'll proceed. You'll wait your turn. You always do. You sit on the bench at the edge of the drive, trunk beside you, hands folded atop your gloves. The gravel is damp beneath your boots, the air thick with the scent of turned soil and faded roses. A late frost has curled the garden edges, and somewhere behind you a clock strikes. 9. The agency coach will come when it comes. You're no longer worried about punctuality. You've ceased expecting things to arrive on time, especially kindness. As you wait, you listen to the sounds of Winmere House one final time, the muted clatter of breakfast trays in the scullery, a door banging upstairs, the faint strains of piano, Clara no doubt practicing the same waltz you taught her 2 weeks ago. You wonder if she'll perform it the same way for Miss Hargrave or sabotage it just to see if the new governess reacts. You exhale slowly, the breath visible in the cold morning air. Then a sound. Wheels on gravel. The coach appears, worn and familiar. You rise, adjust your satchel and lift your trunk by the handle. The driver doesn't descend to help. He never does. He barely acknowledges your eyes as you settle into the back seat. As the house recedes behind you, you allow yourself a moment of indulgence. Not regret, but reflection. You remember the first day, the butler who didn't smile, the cracked basin in the attic room, the meal on a tray that smelled faintly of rust. You remember the children, how Felix ridiculed your lessons and Clara assessed your presence like a threat. How the mistress never once used your complete name, how your identity was slowly reduced into polite, silent service. But also you remember the small kindnesses, Clara's scribbled note, the way Felix handed you that pencil without being prompted, the brief warmth of the library, the line of poetry that made you feel seen, even if only once. Once. It's not substantial, but it's what you carry. The coach jerks down the lane, past hedgerows and bare trees, past the twisted path leading to the village and onward toward the station. You pass a small cottage chimney releasing smoke, garden beds anticipating spring. For one painful moment you imagine what it would be like to live there, to belong somewhere, to wake to your own stove, your own tea, your own name spoken by someone who knows it by heart. But the coach doesn't halt. Naturally not. It continues on. And so do you. You open your satchel and retrieve Clara's note. You're better than this house. You smooth the crease, fold it again, and place it into your glove. Not because you accept it, but because sometimes the memory of being told is sufficient to keep going. The agency office will smell of ink and mildew. The waiting room will be filled with women like you, worn gloves, hopeful eyes. The questions will arrive in rapid succession. Are you musical? Do you speak French? Have you any health complaints? Are you suitable for households with dogs? You will respond to each one with practiced calm, and eventually someone will say, "We may have a placement, nothing permanent but a temporary position by the sea." And you will say, "That sounds just fine," because it does. The agency is situated on a crooked little lane in London, wedged between a second-hand bookseller and a pawn shop that always smells faintly of boiled cabbage and regret. You know the scent well. You've been here before. The bell above the door jangles as you enter, dragging your trunk behind you. The clerk, Ms. Blevins, glances up with an expression that settles somewhere between recognition and professional boredom. "Miss T," she says, "back so soon?" You nod, offering the thin smile that defines your entire profession. Not too warm, not too bleak, just enough to register humanity without suggesting hope. Ms. Blevins gestures toward the bench against the wall. "Take a seat. We've 3 other ladies ahead of you. You do as you're instructed." The waiting room smells of damp wool, lavender sachets, and the faintest trace of despair. The other governesses don't speak. One is mending a glove, another pretends to read Lalla Rookh. The third stares out the window with the rigid composure of someone who has just been dismissed and hasn't decided yet whether to cry about it. Your name is eventually called. You sit across from Miss Blevins's desk, the wood worn smooth from decades of desperation. She sifts through a stack of thin folders and extracts one, creased at the corner, with your name on the tab. She reads aloud. Windmere House. No references provided. No official grievance filed. Work quality noted as adequate though aloof. She lifts an eyebrow. That final remark. Was it supposed to be praise? You stay silent. She gives a slight shrug. Well, preferable to a controversy, I guess. She turns several pages, moistening her thumb before each flip. There's a temporary opening available. A coastal residence near Brighton. A widow, 2 girls, 4 to possibly 6 months. No animals, no piano. You give a nod. I'll accept it. She squints at you above her glasses. You haven't inquired about the pay. I'll accept it, you say again. Miss Blevins writes your name on a new placement form. You sign at the bottom, your handwriting somewhat unsteady from the chill. She stamps it with a solid thump, then pushes several coins across the wooden surface. Travel funds minus the agency's cut, minus last month's registration charge. You slip them into your pocket without checking the amount. Outside again, the atmosphere is heavy with coal fumes and vendors shouting about roasted chestnuts and newspapers. You cover 3 blocks before locating a bench where you can sit and catch your breath. You don't weep. You haven't for weeks now. Instead, you pull from your coat the small piece of paper Clara slipped you. You open it once more. You're worth more than this place. You've examined it countless times, but now you spot something else on the reverse side, faded and partially erased. Clara has scrawled an incomplete phrase. Maybe someday I'll... And then it just stops. You picture her glancing back nervously, writing hurriedly, worried the mistress might notice. You grin not because it brings comfort, but because it's genuine. Later, at the train depot, you sit on a bench with your trunk beside your feet and the ocean-scented breeze on your skin. You hold no illusions. The widow might be harsh, the children might be difficult, the attic quarters might be more cramped than before, but the ocean is real, and that, right now, is sufficient. The train toward Brighton sways gently on the rails, its pace constant and oddly calming. You sit next to your trunk in the economy car, bundled in your thickest wrap, observing the scenery stream past in shades of tan and grey. Empty fields, pale bushes, the occasional startled bird taking flight into the frigid sky. Opposite you, an old man dozes with his jaw slack and a newspaper folded precisely on his knees. Nobody talks. It's the kind of quiet unique to English railways, courteous, thick and total. You rest your head against the glass and let your mind wander. Windermere is already fading, not merely in distance but in recollection. The hurt is less sharp now, eased by separation and the prospect of sea breezes. Clara's message still sits in your bag, tucked between pages of your diary like a preserved bloom, delicate but oddly enduring. You think about Miss Hargrave, youthful, enthusiastic, inexperienced. She'll adapt or she won't. Regardless, the household will continue. The lady will keep hosting her gatherings. The gentleman will keep reading The Spectator. Felix will still moisten his fingers before handling the Globe. And Clara, she'll pen more unfinished musings in the edges of her notebooks, searching for someone who pays attention. It won't be you, not going forward. You breathe out, the glass fogging slightly. The train decelerates as it nears a smaller depot. Beyond, fishermen drag boxes toward carts and seabirds wheel overhead like tattered spirits. You detect the faintest hint of brine in the atmosphere, sharp, pure, unfamiliar. Your new employer is supposed to collect you at the station. Mrs. Hawthorne, a widow with girls aged 10 and 12. The agency records portrayed her as strict, methodical, appreciative of structure. You've encountered worse. Appreciation isn't necessary, only precision. The train sighs as it halts. You descend with your trunk and survey the platform. A woman in a dark bonnet and sensible boots stands near the entrance. Arms crossed, gaze keen. She looks you up and down without a smile. You'll be Miss T. You nod. She dips her head once. We'll proceed on foot. The girls are at their music instruction. And just like that, your new situation commences. Not with greeting, but with instruction. You trail her down a slim street where the buildings press like veteran soldiers against the breeze. The ocean emerges between rooftops, light green rimmed with white foam, shifting with a force that doesn't acknowledge who's watching. Mrs. Hawthorne speaks just once during the walk. You'll discover us organised but not permissive. My deceased husband favoured a regulated home. I do too. I trust you have no sentimental ideas about teaching. There's scarce space for emotion. You nearly laugh. Nearly. No, ma'am, you reply. I favour structure. And you do. Structure is protection. Structure is refuge. And within it you can carry your invisible self with honour. That evening your new quarters are tidy but plain. A cot, a seat, a desk, no hearth but a heavier blanket than the previous one. You unpack your belongings slowly. Tuck Clara's message in the drawer and sit by the little window facing the dark ocean. You can't observe it now, but you can detect it. Constant, agitated, untamed. You sit quietly, simply listening, because sometimes that's sufficient. Sometimes hearing the ocean is the nearest thing to being acknowledged. 14 days into your new position, you're in a market plaza on an uncommon morning away, standing before a wooden board covered with postings. One penned in a dramatic flowing script captures your attention. Governess's registry office, seeking placement for seasoned applicants. Present yourself in person. No minors allowed in reception area. Your immediate reaction is to turn away. You already hold a position. You're not hunting for one, but the wording pulls at something within you. Seasoned applicants. You've never considered yourself veteran, precisely. Just persistent. You continue on, gripping your shopping basket, hearing the squeal of your boots on the stones. The ocean air here is keener than in London. The gulls more vocal. The butcher packages your meat in used newsprint. The lady at the bakery booth addresses you as Miss without hesitation. Nobody here knows your background, and that, for the moment, is a blessing. The Hawthorne girls are, fortunately, controllable. Not submissive, not affectionate, but controllable. Marion the older recites her times tables like she's training for combat. Lillian poses questions with a doctor's exactness, each one designed to cut through your reasoning. But they aren't vicious. And that too is a type of privilege. Mrs. Hawthorne remains withdrawn. She reviews your records weekly, demands timeliness, and dislikes humming, but she doesn't challenge your every decision. She grants you space, which in your reality might as well be fondness. Your attic quarters are compact but moisture-free. The linens don't reek of dampness. The drapes, though flimsy, are fresh. And in the mornings, when sunlight appears over the ocean, it throws a gentle golden glow across the floorboards that almost makes you trust in tranquility. Almost. Still, even here, the shadows of previous positions follow you like dangling threads. You notice yourself serving tea too softly. You resist addressing the girls as dear, though you occasionally wish to. You press your cuffs obsessively. One night, as the girls duplicate spelling exercises, you notice Marion studying your hands. They appear melancholy, she states, abruptly. You blink. My hands? She nods, like they're constantly waiting. You glance down. Ink-stained digits, a pale red mark where your gloves grip. A tiny scar near your thumb from a shattered teacup last spring. You conceal them in your lap. The girls go back to their work. Later that evening you compose a letter to the agency, not for a new position, but for a duplicate of your own record. You want to discover what they've documented, what variant of you now resides in their files. 2 days afterward, the correspondence comes, a single folded sheet. You read it twice. Productive, reserved, skilled. Inclines toward emotional distance. You trace the phrases with your thumb. Productive, reserved, skilled. And then that final statement. You assume they intend it as a weakness, but in your reality, it's endurance. Emotional distance isn't the lack of sentiment, it's the craft of not being overwhelmed by it. You refold the correspondence and tuck it in the rear of your diary. You don't weep, you merely descend, heat water for tea, and arrange tomorrow's instruction on the explorers of the South Pacific. Because if there's one lesson you've absorbed, it's that surviving as a governess is mastering the skill of charting a course even when the maps are incorrect. Later that week, you're positioned on a bench just beyond the waterline, diary in hand, though you haven't inscribed a word in 20 minutes. The ocean is withdrawn today, drawn back like an inhale being suspended, revealing behind shimmering expanses and the slow sparkle of daylight on damp rock. You draw it in, the salt, the gust, the pale metallic scent that appears to attach to every stone and fastener and window pane in this harbour town. Behind you, a small group of school children walk by, giggling. One of them gestures to your diary and mentions something you can't entirely catch. It's irrelevant. You're accustomed to being indicated, murmured about, not always from cruelty, sometimes just puzzlement. A woman by herself is always an object of interest, particularly one in grey. You drag your fingers over the sheet of your diary. The paper is rough, the ink inexpensive. You contemplate writing about the market vendor that smelled of anise and seafood, or the woman who peddled dried lavender bundled in pieces of ribbon. But instead, you inscribe just 3 words, still not observed. Then you pause. You consider the children you've instructed over the years. Clara with her sharp mockery and incomplete musings. Felix always acting indifferent. The nameless girls at your prior positions, each one either too silent or too alert. You ponder how many of them recall you. Likely none. You're not intended to be recalled. Governesses are the parentheses in a household's existence, the interval, the bracketed annotation, the partially voiced phrase rapidly overwritten by time. Back at the Hawthorne residence, the girls are expecting with their books and tablets. You've organised an instruction on natural science, something regarding tide pools to correspond with the setting. But before you start, Marion inquires, unprompted, "Did you always wish to teach?" You pause. It's not a question children typically pose, not ones like her regardless, perceptive, watchful, with a voice that permits no space for dodging. No, you respond honestly. She nods. Lillian glances up from her notebook. What did you wish to do? Then you reflect for a moment. The response surfaces from some long-buried corner. Read, you state, constantly. They ponder this. Then Marion states, that's dull. Lillian adds, I think it's wonderful. You smile softly, entertained at how frequently truth exists in opposition. Following the instruction, the girls are released. You stay behind to organise the classroom, replacing chalk, shutting books, straightening the creases in the map of the British Isles. And there on your desk you discover a sheet ripped from a notebook. On it, a rough drawing of you, little, rigid, with a bun and a pencil in hand. Below it, Marion has inscribed, Miss T appreciates oceans and verses and being solitary, but not constantly. You stare at it for an extended time. Then you fold it and tuck it in the pocket of your garment. As you cleanse your hands afterward, you observe your reflection in the wash basin glass, distorted but truthful. The identical eyes, the identical narrow mouth, but something gentler around the borders, something like being perceived. It starts innocently enough, at least, as these matters frequently do. One morning in April, as you're organising the girls' spelling instruction, you overhear Mrs. Hawthorne conversing with someone in the entrance hall. Her voice is softer than typical, coloured with entertainment. You're not supposed to listen naturally, but it drifts up the stairwell like aroma from the kitchen. No, not the housekeeper, the teacher. She's very restrained, very proper. A man's voice responds. You don't capture the words, only the manner. Refined, precise. The kind that belongs to a younger offspring of a landowning household or someone pretending to be one. You go back to the classroom and proceed setting out tablets. The interaction should signify nothing, a caller passing through. It occurs, but you can't help observing the manner Mrs. Hawthorne's voice tightens whenever she speaks your name now, or how she now examines your instruction outlines with mild distrust, as if searching for concealed communications. And then 2 days afterward, the caller reappears. This time, you observe him. You're coming back from the garden with the girls, your arms laden with notebooks, and a damp hem from the morning moisture. When you enter the hall and discover him by the coat stand, he's just removing his gloves, elevated, light-haired, a walking cane with a silver wolf's head grip. He glances at you, and here is where it occurs. He grins, not the type reserved for servants or children or women who don't count, but the type offered to peers. You nod, restrained, proper, just like Mrs. Hawthorne portrayed. But he maintains your gaze one moment too extended. Afterward, at dinner, Marion mentions it casually between mouthfuls of bread. Mr. Lewis stated you possessed a scholar's features. You look up from your tea. Mrs. Hawthorne's utensil freezes in her grasp. I beg your pardon, she states. Marion shrugs. That's what he stated. A face that studies books. Before talking, Lillian adds, he inquired how long you'd been here. You speak nothing because there is nothing to speak. And yet the atmosphere transforms. Mrs. Hawthorne places her utensil down, her lips compressed together in that refined manner that conveys far more than words ever could. After the children are released, she requests to converse with you privately in the parlour. She doesn't sit. She stands near the glass, observing the ocean beyond the hedge. I've maintained good structure in this residence, Miss T. I've preserved it deliberately. You comprehend what that demands? Yes, ma'am, you state quietly. She rotates. Good. Then I trust you'll preserve that structure. You lower your head, not in acceptance, but because it's what's demanded. Afterward, as you arrange the next day's copywork, your hands shake just slightly. Not because of Mr. Lewis, but because of the strength of a look, a grin, a phrase repeated by a child. You had been cautious. You had maintained your head lowered, and still it discovered you. Not affection, not longing, just the concept of it. And that's always been sufficient to destroy women like you. You do everything correct following that. You avoid the sitting room when callers come. You take the extended route around the residence rather than traverse the entrance hall. You practice neutrality like a musician practices scales, again and again until your manner has no form and your expression becomes as impenetrable as rock. And still, it doesn't count. 3 days afterward, Mrs. Hawthorne requests a quick word. Following dinner, you trail her into the study, hands clasped so firmly your knuckles blanch. She shuts the door gently. "I've received notification from the agency," she states. "They've located someone more regional, a teacher from Hove, highly qualified." You nod gradually. "This is no judgment on your capabilities," she adds, as though reciting from a text. "We are merely refining the arrangement of the household. Refining." You wish to laugh, but you don't. You inquire, steadily, "When would you prefer me to depart?" Mrs. Hawthorne clasps her hands behind her spine and stares out the dim glass. "A week should be adequate." You nod again. "I'll have the quarters in arrangement." She breathes out, obviously relieved that you aren't weeping, begging, or elevating your voice. She doesn't thank you, just moves aside so you may exit. You pack gradually that evening, folding each piece of clothing as though you're smoothing the documentation of your presence here. The girls are informed nothing, but children always understand. The following morning, Marion stares at you during dictation like she's attempting to memorize something. Lillian inquires, "Do governesses ever retire?" You smile tenderly. "Some do." You don't state how. You don't state where. That evening, as you collect the spelling books from the garden, Mr. Lewis emerges again. He tips his hat. You lower your head and proceed straight past. You don't converse. You don't glance, because you are not a fool, and because you now comprehend something new and harsh about your station. It's not that you aren't permitted affection. It's that you are disciplined for being capable of it, even if you never pursue it, even if you never reciprocate a grin, even if all you do is exist in a manner that might tempt someone to look too extended. You are cautious. You are invisible, and still, you are visible sufficient to be dismissed. Your final evening. Marion leaves something folded under your Latin textbook. You discover it just before rest, a drawing, simple but intentional. It's a lighthouse illuminating across turbulent water. Below, she's inscribed. Some individuals observe things even when others pretend not to. You stare at it, then fold it and position it beside Clara's message. Your collection expands, not in earnings, not in garments, but in paper. Tiny evidence that you existed here, that someone once perceived you, even if the world preferred you weren't. Your following position brings you inland, distant from the ocean, distant from the salty, dense winds and the murmur of waves beyond your attic glass. This time it's a townhouse, crimson brick, vine-draped, 3 floors elevated, wedged between a lawyer's office and a tailor's establishment. No garden, no vista. The street is slim and surfaced with irregular stones that snag the edges of your boots. The household is named Elwood. Dr. Elwood is a doctor, absent most days and evenings. Mrs. Elwood is wan and vigilant, like someone who once existed loudly and now tucks herself into small spaces of the residence. Their child, only one, is a boy named Henry, 6 years mature, fragile, grave and strangely ceremonial, like a child nurtured by furnishings. He doesn't misbehave, he doesn't chuckle. He simply exists, like a quiet custom the residents formed and never abandoned. Your quarters are on the upper floor again. You no longer react to attic areas. The wallpaper is aged and the floor tilts gently toward the distant wall. But there's a bookshelf and a small carpet, and the glass opens without resistance. It's sufficient. You establish yourself quickly. The instructions are straightforward. Alphabet exercises, nature studies, verse, recitations. Henry complies without question, though you start to suspect that isn't an indication of comprehension. He echoes facts the manner an echo does, accurately, but without grasp. Still, he sits motionless. He attends. He finishes his arithmetic. You've had worse. What disturbs you most is the quietness, not just from the child, but from the residence itself. There are no evening gatherings, no sitting room merriment, no footfalls beyond what's required. You observe Mrs. Elwood in transit. She nods courteously, speaks minimally. Sometimes she observes you over the railing as you guide Henry to instructions, her hands gripping the rail like she's stabilizing herself on a vessel in rough waters. On your fourth day she converses not to correct you, not to commend, simply to inquire, do you find him peculiar? You blink. Pardon, ma'am. Henry, she states gently. He doesn't appear like other children, does he? You hesitate. I think he's very watchful, you propose cautiously. She breathes out, and for a moment you think she might state something genuine. But then she encloses herself back up, nods, and vanishes into her parlour, like fog under a threshold. You're left positioned on the landing, Henry's hand in yours, uncertain who in this residence is supposed to be tended to, and who is supposed to do the tending. That evening, you inscribe in your diary, the child observes everything. The mother observes nothing. The father is a legend. You sketch a small illustration of a confined bird beneath it. Not to be ingenious, just because the sheet appeared too empty. The days at the Elwood residence accumulate like library volumes, precisely arranged, clean, untouched by anything resembling happiness. Henry arrives punctually each morning. You nod. He nods. You commence. He recites. You correct. He blinks. Then you commence again. You attempt verse to stir something. Blake, Tennyson, Christina Rossetti. Nothing registers. Even the rhyme in Goblin Market scarcely makes him glance up. You assign him phrases to duplicate. Better by far you should forget and smile than that you should remember and be sorrowful. He duplicates it automatically, the quill scratching like a clock ticking. You wonder if he comprehends sorrow or if he simply catalogues it, like the insects secured in the specimen container Dr. Elwood maintains in his study. That evening, you descend to the sitting room to request additional slate pencils. The threshold is open. You overhear Mrs. Elwood conversing with the housemaid, not in irritation but with an exhaustion that makes your stomach tighten. She doesn't create difficulty, the mistress states, but she's so motionless, like she's already disappeared. You realise slowly they're not discussing the boy, they're discussing you, and that's when it strikes you. You have somehow become indistinct, not through failure, but through achievement. You've been so appropriate, so silent, so relentlessly functional that you've become part of the wallpaper. You recall the agency's record, inclines toward emotional distance, and here, in this silent residence, that trait has made you ideal. You are the void that maintains the space together. That evening, you receive correspondence from Miss Parsons' seminary. Someone there still recalls you. A former student, now a teacher at a girls' academy, has written to request a recommendation for a new governess. They want to discover if you're still in service, still obtainable, still appropriate. You fold the correspondence slowly and position it on the windowsill. The candlelight captures the edge of it, throwing a long shadow across your trunk. You sit with it, and you understand you could proceed there. You could instruct older girls, lecture, compose, be perceived. But what unnerves you is that part of you wavers. You have become proficient at this phantom work, this tucking of yourself into corners, this silent mastery of endurance. There's ease in being disregarded. There's security in distance, but there's also forfeiture. You glance at the drawing Marion created, the lighthouse in the tempest, and think, would I still illuminate if nobody ever approached near again? You position the correspondence beneath your diary. Not a rejection, but not a response either. Tomorrow you'll instruct Henry about beetles. He will attend. He will not inquire why they curl into themselves when contacted, but you'll inform him regardless, because sometimes the question is suggested and sometimes the response is more for you than for them. The beetles come in a small timber box requested from a scientific vendor by Dr. Elwood at your appeal. You hadn't anticipated him to consent, had barely anticipated a reply to your note. But the box materialises on the classroom desk 3 days afterward without remark, sealed with a grand green wax impression. Inside, 6 secured specimens labelled in precise copper plate. Cetonia aurata, Carabus nemoralis, Silpha atrata, each positioned on cork, rigid-legged and gleaming. Henry stares at them as if they've materialised from another planet. You position the box on the surface between you. These are scavengers, you clarify gently, but also essential. They cleanse what others abandon. He moves in closer. Do they bite? He asks. No, you tell him. They hide instead. He gives a single nod, then stays silent for what's left of the morning. Later though, during the handwriting lesson, he sketches one in the margin, a small iridescent smudge with uneven legs and a shell curved with something like dignity. You don't say anything about it. You simply let it exist there. That night, as you're logging the day's progress in the schoolroom record, you stop halfway through a line Henry demonstrated remarkable focus with. You leave it unfinished. You close the book instead and go outside. The Elwood townhouse has no garden to speak of, just a narrow brick courtyard tucked behind the kitchen wall. But tonight you settle onto the single bench and listen to rainwater dripping from the eaves, watching lamplight shimmer in the puddles. There's no breeze, no ocean, no sound of children playing, only the patient ticking forward of time. Something comes back to you then, something minor and almost absurd. The first time you taught a child how to spell the word window, she was 6 years old. Her name was Alice. You traced every letter across her palm and she giggled as though you'd cast a charm. You haven't thought about her in years. You wonder what became of her. You wonder if you cross her mind. Perhaps she spelled window on someone else's palm years afterward and thought distantly of the governess who showed her how. Or perhaps you vanished from her memory the instant you walked out. That's how it goes. Your life unfolds in other people's beginnings, never in their main stories. You head back inside, the edge of your dress damp. You dry it beside the fire in the schoolroom, toes tucked close to the hearth like a child hoarding warmth. Upstairs, the house stays quiet. No laughter, no disputes, just silence stacked upon silence like folded sheets in a cupboard. You feel the weight of everything missing at once, affection, connection, a voice speaking your name as though it held meaning. But you don't fall into despair, not these days. You simply persist, like a beetle beneath bark, hidden still, essential. The following morning, Henry doesn't show up for his lesson. You wait 10 minutes, then 15. Finally, the housemaid taps on the schoolroom door with her cap crooked and her face flushed from too many flights of stairs. Master Henry's feeling poorly, she tells you. Mrs. Elwood says lessons are cancelled today. You nod. Is it bad? The maid lifts her shoulders. A fever, they're saying. The doctor's been called. She's with him right now. You thank her and go back to your desk. But you don't sit down. You move around the schoolroom instead, brushing your fingers along things you usually overlook: the edge of the globe, the weathered corner of the window frame, the space on the shelf where a copy of Grimm's fairy tales disappeared sometime after you arrived. The room suddenly feels unmoored, like furniture floating free. You keep looking toward the door, half expecting the boy to appear, quiet as always, slate tucked under his arm, trailing the smell of starch and ink. He doesn't. That afternoon, Mrs. Elwood shows up for the first time in several days. You're in the hallway, coming back from the kitchen with a basin of hot water, when you nearly collide with her. She looks drained, not in a delicate way, not fashionably, but truly drained, as if the colour has been pulled from her skin. He's been asking for you, she says. You pause. Henry. She nods once. Her hands shake slightly. He wouldn't explain why. Just kept saying Miss T, the one who understands Beatles. Your chest constricts without warning. You set the basin down and follow her upstairs. Henry is in bed, a tiny motionless form under a thick wool blanket. His face is flushed, his lips parched, his eyes open when you walk in. He doesn't speak, but his fingers reach toward you. You sit at the bedside and take his hand carefully. It's hot, far too hot, a fever that pulses just under the surface. You speak softly about Beatles, about the tide pools you saw once near Brighton, about the shells that spiral perfectly but hold nothing inside. You can't tell if he's listening, but he doesn't release your hand. Mrs. Elwood stands in the doorway watching silently. When the doctor finally comes, you're sent away without fanfare, like a ghost who lingered past her welcome. Back in your attic room. You sit on the bed's edge, still feeling Henry's heat in your palm like stolen warmth. You think about all the children whose hands you've never held, not from coldness, but from rules, from distance, from boundaries, drawn too sharply between kindness and crossing lines. You recall a governess once let go for soothing a child through a thunderstorm, simply held her until the rain stopped, the agency report said. Overly familiar with the children. And yet you also recall children who cried and no one comforted them. You lie back, staring upward, thinking how peculiar it is that the most human gestures become scandalous when a governess makes them. You close your eyes, and for once you don't imagine another position, or another household, or another thin mattress in another cramped room. You just imagine Henry's small burning hand in yours, evidence that you existed, even if just briefly. A week passes, you're sitting once more in the agency office. The same green walls, the same damp scent of ink and coal, the same chair that leans slightly leftward. Miss Blevins doesn't glance up right away. Her desk looks even more cluttered than before. Paper scraps, an open tin of mints, a small dish of straight pins, unopened letters bound with string. You recognise the feeling of accumulated work and mild disorder. She finally sees you and releases a sigh, half amused, half weary. Ms. T, I see. You give the same composed nod you've offered every other time. You're not shocked to be here. Not truly. Henry got better, but gradually, and in the confusion that came after. Medicines, exhausted nights, too many callers. Something changed. Mrs. Elwood grew even paler, even more fragile. You weren't dismissed this time. You were let go. That's the phrase she chose. You've served well, but the household needs to simplify. Henry will be taught by a cousin. Thank you for everything. Right then, Ms. Blevins starts leafing through your file. Lasted longer this round, she mumbles. You decide not to reply. She takes a fresh placement slip from her drawer. Something just came in this morning. Rural Lancashire, small property, 3 boys, vicar's household. The pay's humble, but they include room and coal. You nod. I'll accept it. You always say that, she remarks, not meanly. She completes the form with a thick fountain pen, her handwriting smudging slightly on the curve. I'm qualified, you know, she says while writing. I've been here 23 years. You notice patterns. Some girls arrive starry-eyed, then crumble after their first placement, marry some farmer or vanish completely. Some get fortunate, land with a rich family that has loose boundaries. Others shatter like dropped porcelain. She looks up, her gaze sharp now and then. There's you. You hold her stare. What am I? Miss Blevins puts down her pen. Unbreakable. The word settles strangely, not as praise but as observation, a classification. You stay silent. She passes you the slip. Coach departs Thursday morning. The place is called Netherby Cross. Dress warmly. It's colder in that region. You stand thank her and leave without ceremony. The fog hangs thick across the London streets and you draw your shawl closer. A boy sells matches at the curb. A woman hawks roasted chestnuts with soot-blackened fingers. You walk past a bookshop and stop at the window. Jane Eyre, a recent edition, blue binding. gold letters priced well beyond your means. You've never cared for that book, not because of the prose, because of the deception it offers readers. She married him. No governess you've known ever did. You keep walking that evening. You return to your boarding room, temporary as ever, and set your trunk beside the bed. You run your palm across the brass clasp, tracing the grooves where labels have torn away, handles polished smooth by constant leaving. You take out your journal. Under it, the letters and scraps you've carried position after position. Clara's messy writing, Marian's lighthouse, Henry's beetle. You unfold them, arrange them in a row. They are your inheritance. Not children you raised, not wealth you accumulated, but small private evidence that you aren't invisible. You are witnessed, even if only by those too young to speak it clearly. You sleep restlessly that night, not from fear, but from the steady rhythm of repetition, the cycle of packing and unpacking, of entering homes through service doors and exiting through side gates, of sitting on hard benches in agency offices, waiting to hear your name called, like a package waiting to be picked up. Morning arrives with grey clouds and coal smoke twisting around the rooftops. You wake early, wash your collar, clean your boots and polish the brass fittings on your trunk for no particular reason. The trip north to Netherby Cross takes most of the day. By arrival, your dress carries the smell of soot and wet wool. The coach leaves you near a frozen hedge with only faint chimney smoke to point you toward the house. You locate it eventually, a plain stone property surrounded by bare trees and watchful crows. No grand entrance, no polished butler, just a maid with a pinched expression who leads you up the servants' stairs without speaking. Your room is bare and square, with a sloped ceiling and a mattress filled with straw, a basin, a cracked mirror, a wooden cross hung above the window. You unpack automatically, first the journal, then the shawl, then the folded paper pieces hidden in your undergarments like smuggled goods. You smooth each one, set them along the windowsill. They're creased now, faintly yellowed, the ink starting to blur, but they remain yours. The vicar's wife meets you over cold tea in the drawing room. Her smile is tight, her eyes kind but elsewhere. "You'll find the boys difficult," she says, pouring without offering sugar. "Their previous governess lasted only 2 weeks, but I've warned them you're not to be challenged." You nod. That much is accurate. You meet the boys the following day, 12, 9, and 6, all red-haired and freckled, filled with questions about beetles and ghost tales and whether governesses can whistle. You say yes and demonstrate they burst out laughing. That afternoon you notice one of them studying you quietly while you set up dictation. He cocks his head. "Are you lonely?" You blink. "Excuse me." He shrugs. "You seem like you live inside your thoughts." You smile for real. "I live many places," you tell him. "My mind is just the most peaceful." He thinks about this. Then, in the blunt, absolute way only children manage, he announces, "I think you're odd." And for the first time in weeks, you laugh. It's quick light, vanishing as fast as it appears, but it's genuine. That night you go back to your room, light the candle stub and open your journal. You write one line, "I laughed today and nobody seemed alarmed." You look at it, then underline it gently, once. It might not continue. Most things don't. But in that instant, in that small attic with the candle wavering and the wind starting to howl through the gaps, you feel human again. Not a stand-in. Not a shadow. Just a woman. Odd, noticed, still present. You remain at Netherby Cross longer than anticipated, longer than most governesses, definitely. The vicar's wife doesn't mention it outright, but you catch it in how she hesitates when handing over your wages. The boys, too, appear vaguely startled every Monday when you show up with fresh lessons and starched cuffs like you're a visitor who refused to depart, like they can't decide whether to feel grateful or uneasy, and you don't exactly settle in, but you start to open up just a little. The boys, Thomas, George and young Ben, are noisy, dirty and exasperating, but they're also genuine, in the way only children without servants or silver can be. They don't ridicule your bearing. They don't mock your speech. They do inquire if you're married, naturally, but not maliciously, just inquisitively, like they're collecting information about existence. When you say no, they nod seriously, as if this somehow enhances your mystery. You are to them, part instructor, part minor woodland witch. You appreciate that. On Sundays, you go with them to the vicar's service. You sit in the fourth row beside the boys, where Ben squirms and George whispers questions about angels during the singing. You respond only once, softly, from the side of your mouth. No wings, just old clothing and grand notions. The boys laugh hard enough to be moved to the back row. You don't apologise. On Monday mornings you conduct lessons in the small upstairs room that smells faintly of ink. Ink, dust and burning wood. You've started drawing again, basic things initially. Maps, insects, fairy tale castles. The boys reproduce them and occasionally enhance them. You discover one of Ben's drawings tucked in your Latin reader. A tower on a hill, with a small grey figure standing at the peak, cloak billowing in the wind. You recognise yourself. He's written below. Ms. T is brave. You place it next to Clara's note and Marion's lighthouse. Another paper. Proof. Another quiet affirmation. The vicar's wife still maintains her distance. She nods cordially when you cross paths, inquires about grammar and attendance, and seldom looks directly at you. But she started leaving items outside your door. A scone in fabric, a candle stub, a sprig of rosemary. Small gestures of peace, small tokens of regard. Sometimes, after the boys are asleep, you take long walks along the property's edge. The fields stretch outward like green swells. The sky hangs low, crowded with rooks and smoke. You gather feathers, pressed leaves, once a stone with a hole through its centre. The wind is different here, sharper, cleaner, tinged with peat, and something nearly sweet. You feel less like an outsider, and more like a constant. One overcast afternoon, George asks if you've ever been in love. You're midway through a sentence about irregular French verbs when he drops the question like a stone in still water. The other two boys go quiet, sensing something weightier than normal. You pause, then shut the grammar book. You gaze out the window briefly before responding. I've loved people, you say quietly, but I'm not sure I've been in love. Ben, who is 6 and believes love means giving away your last biscuit, nods seriously. George frowns. Is that sad? You tilt your head. Not particularly, you say. Some people pursue grand, romantic stories. Some people live quietly loving things other people never see. Like beetles, says Thomas. You smile exactly like beetles. The room eases. The moment folds itself away, preserved between pages like a pressed flower. Later that week you get a letter from the agency. A new position, London again, a wealthier household, better pay, 2 girls ages 8 and 10, promises of improved prospects. You hold the letter near the fire, reading it twice. The offer is excellent, quite excellent. But when you look up, Ben is at the schoolroom entrance, covered in chalk and holding a drawing. It's you again, this time riding a griffin. Do you want it? He asks. You take the picture and shake your head. No, you say gently. I want you to keep that one. He grins, and you understand you've already chosen. You write back to the agency that night. Thank you, but no. You stay at Netherby Cross through winter's end, then spring, then the summer following. The days pass gently. Lessons, ink-stained fingers, stories read aloud by candlelight. Sometimes you still wake at night, pulse racing, anticipating dismissal or blame. But the anxiety recedes faster now. You are, as Miss Blevins once observed, unbreakable. But beyond that, You are unchased away, retained, trusted, even appreciated. One peaceful evening you find a note slipped under your teacup, written in a child's hand: "If you go away, we'll probably become wolves." You laugh, a true laugh, not the measured one, not the mannered one, but a complete, unguarded sound that bounces off the walls and makes the candle dance. You place the note with the others, the expanding small collection of your quiet legacy, the lives you've touched, the small peculiar wonders you've left in your wake. You don't register the ache in your hands until autumn arrives. It begins with stiffness. Come morning, your fingers are sluggish to curl, your knuckles hesitant to fold. You blame the cold, the passing years maybe, though you're not elderly, not quite. But there's something weary inside you, a weariness that reaches your marrow. Not because of the boys. They still meet you with those crooked smiles and fingertips stained with ink. Not because of the vicar's wife who's taken to leaving tea outside your room each Wednesday. Not even because of the rhythm of things which has transformed into something near to solace. No, this exhaustion is the sort that accumulates from decades spent without pause, without a place to call your own, without the variety of calm that doesn't require constant vigilance. One afternoon, while drawing the framework of a kestrel for Thomas, your hand locks, the pencil falls, a sharp bolt of pain shoots through your wrist and you curse quietly. But before you can catch yourself, Ben overhears. "You said a bad word," he breathes, his eyes enormous. You laugh through the discomfort. Even a small one still matters. You work your fingers carefully. The joints resist, puffy and sore. The boys start observing you more intently. From then on, they retrieve chalk unprompted. They duplicate their assignments so you won't need to mark them. They haul your bag down the steps without complaint. You don't mention it, but you see. One morning, George delivers a cup of heated milk sweetened with honey. "You seem chilly," he explains, then hurries away. Another night, Thomas appears at your door holding a basin of water and a worn cloth for your hands. You shut the door and perch on your bed's edge. You lower your fingers into the heated basin, allow the soreness to surface and ease. There's no letter from the agency this time, no notice of termination, no murmur from the vicar's wife. But you understand it's almost time to leave, not from being unwanted, not from inadequacy, but because your body is requesting you softly, insistently to cease being forged from steel, to permit yourself to become yielding, if only for your story's final chapter. You compose a letter to Ms. Blevins, not seeking employment, merely expressing gratitude. You anticipate no response. You gather your things unhurriedly, carefully, every item positioned with intention. The beetle illustrations, the griffin, the lighthouse, the record of modest generosities. The children offer their farewells through subtle gestures. A feather tucked into your coat, a small stone left on your windowsill, a folded note creased into quarters. We'll hold you in memory even after we mature and abandon faith in governesses. You depart before daybreak. The household sleeps, wrapped in silence. The only noise comes from floorboards groaning beneath your boots and distant embers shifting in the fireplace. Below, your trunk feels lighter now, not from emptiness, but from deliberate choices. You've abandoned old records, a damaged teacup, 2 threadbare dresses you've grown indifferent to. Instead, you keep small treasures that hold more meaning than worth. Ben's griffin sketch, George's feather marker, the flattened leaf Thomas once insisted held enchantment. You linger at the staircase top, glancing backward once, not theatrically, not wistfully. Simply a last look, the manner you'd observe a tranquil space where you once rested, contemplating. The pathway glistens with yesterday's rainfall. Fog wraps the hedgerows like drowsiness. You travel toward the station with your shawl drawn tight and your shoulders braced against the cold. No vehicle, no ceremony. This suits you. At the platform, the station master acknowledges you as you near. "Northbound train's delayed," he grumbles. "May as well rest." You agree and ease yourself onto the frigid bench, your joints protesting with a sigh. From habit, you retrieve your journal, the identical one that's journeyed position to position, metropolis to hamlet, fireside to garret. You turn past earlier entries. Some ink has dimmed, other pages show smears, but the voice remains distinctly yours. One page toward the conclusion stands empty. You touch your pencil to it, then hesitate. You're uncertain what to record this time. There's no fury, no isolation gnawing at your throat, only tranquility, a kind of stillness you haven't experienced since girlhood. You write, "Today I depart not to escape, but to find repose." You emphasize it once, nothing more. The train arrives with a rumble and steams release. You stand, drag your trunk aboard and claim a window seat. Your hands throb as you clutch your journal's spine, but they throb less than yesterday, and that suffices. As the train departs, you observe the landscape passing, the slopes, the bushes, the glimpse of a small boy in the meadow waving something pale. You don't lift your hand in response, but you grin. You'll transport them all with you, as you've always done. Except now you carry yourself as well. You reach a town unfamiliar with your identity. No correspondence has preceded you. No relatives await at the entrance. No housekeeper scrutinizes your gloves or judges your bearing against the interior. It's hushed, almost disturbingly so. The inn carries scents of rising dough and burning coal. Your chamber is modest but comfortable, featuring a faded quilt and a washstand that holds water. 2 windows exist. One overlooks the rooftops, the other faces a moss-covered orchard where birds hop among branches. You settle on the bed's edge and inhale, not from routine, but from intention. And that, in its understated way, seems transformative. You establish a pattern, not a governess's timetable, but something uniquely yours. You visit the bakery mornings. You consume robust tea, harsh from excessive boiling. You draw people in the plaza, a ribbon merchant, a boy pursuing pigeons, an elderly man tracing something imperceptible through air with his walking stick. You write, but solely when inclined. And when disinclined, you remain seated. You observe, you absorb. The discomfort in your hands doesn't disappear, but it diminishes. You discover how to bundle them in heated fabric before evening's chill arrives. You encounter a woman locally who produces salves from comfrey and elderflower. She provides you a small container and a grin. Helpful for joints, she mentions. More effective if you trust it. You do, or you wish to. Occasionally, during early afternoon, you consume books you never had opportunity for, not textbooks or chronicles or conduct manuals, but narratives, authentic ones, featuring dragons, featuring reckless girls making bold decisions, featuring conclusions that aren't necessarily neat but leave you oddly content. One evening you discover a passage stating, "She wasn't the variety of woman who shaped history, but she preserved it, and that proved sufficient." You transcribe it into your journal, then emphasize it twice. That night, you envision all the girls you've instructed, each growing elevated, bolder, more unusual, some with spouses, some with volumes, one operating a printing press, one ascending a tree wearing trousers, none flawless, but all feasible. And you sense, as you surface toward consciousness, that you might have contributed to shaping them thus. Weeks transform into months. The innkeeper starts including an additional roll on your tray without cost. The baker demonstrates how to mould dough for proper rising, and you exchange 3 feather drawings for spices. You become gradually, tenderly a presence, not as a governess anchors to a household confined by regulations and duties, but as a tree quietly establishes in earth, roots extending not through dominance but through recognition. You're questioned once by a market woman about your occupation. It startles you, not the inquiry, but your lack of answer. You contemplate responding, "I educated children 25 years, or I resided in 47 separate houses, or perhaps I once excelled at enduring." Instead you beam and respond, "I recuperate." The woman accepts this as though it's perfectly ordinary. You explore a modest museum at town's border. There's a chamber of antique footwear, another of discoloured dolls. One corner contains a battered schoolroom desk bearing a brass marker. It states, "Late Victorian, contributed without attribution." You trace your fingers across the wood's texture and picture all the children who once etched initials along its rim. In the stillness, you nearly detect their merriment. You return leisurely through the orchard, leaves starting to pale. Your knees protest, your hands sting, but your heart no longer startles at every sound approaching. You resume writing, not journals, not correspondence to Miss Blevins, not educational outlines, but a tale, an unusual one. A governess alongside a griffin, a collection of beetles, children transforming into wolves when forsaken, but who vocalise when trusted. You compose deep into night, candlelight wavering, breath clouding the pain. And once completed, you slip the pages into an envelope and dispatch it, not to an agency, but toward a publisher. You're uncertain if it'll see print, but initially, that's irrelevant. What's significant is the voice belonged to you, that it perpetually did, that it continues. And now, with the candle consumed and windows blackened against night, permit yourself to float. You've traversed a life, scarcely acknowledged, but one abundant in modest victories and murmured defiance. You've remained upright when others attempted diminishing you. You've educated minds now wandering freely. You've repaired volumes, calmed fevers, consumed stale bread silently. And still, remarkably, you found laughter. You didn't create magnificent legacies sculpted in marble or inscribed in granite, but you planted stories embedded in children's consciousness, hidden in compartments, written into ledger borders and souls. You were never anyone's protagonist, but you authored your own narrative, and as the chamber dims and your breathing steadies, retain this. You were never terminated, you simply withdrew, according to your decision. No longer a governess, not exactly a lady, but something superior, yourself. So now, lower your eyelids. Sense the pages settling, the dust descending softly toward floorboards. Permit the resonance of chalk and firelight diminishing and envision possibly a peaceful bench in a town finally granting you respite. No demands, no keys at your hip, only you and the tranquility you've eternally merited.